Okay, so welcome everyone to the next episode of BECBC's Shadowboard podcast. Today we're continuing with the board member profiles which we started last year, and we're joined by Ivan Baldwin, the chairman of the business cluster, a role he's held for many years now, but obviously has a number of other hats that he wears. As I'm sure we all know, he's a very well-known person within Cumbria and the wider nuclear sector. He's held roles, as I say, across Cumbria in BAE Systems, in Nuvia, Bendels, the National Nuclear Laboratory, and now with Bechtel, a major US firm, which I'm sure he'll explain more about shortly. So yeah, and then in addition to that, Ivan also holds a number of charity positions on boards, education positions, and also sort of guidance and advisory positions on different groups, especially in the business cluster national makeup as such. So that's a very short introduction anyway, Ivan. I'm sure you can explain more about what you do in much better detail than that. But the first question really is sort of, how are you? It's good to see you. How are things?
Hi, Adam. Thank you for that introduction. You made me sound far more interesting than I think I really, to be quite frank. It sounds really busy, doesn't it? How have I been? Yeah, like many people, I guess, a bit of a pinball machine sort of time, isn't it? Where you feel as though you're bouncing from sort of one thing to another when it comes to the pandemic. I think if there's anyone out there that's managed to, plan and understand and know what was coming next, then they're a lot better person than I am. So, been keeping my head above water, trying to balance work and family. We were just saying before, for me, it feels a little bit more like I'm living at work rather than working from home, because all of my work essentially is from this sort of small office room that we've got in the house. But I'm counting my blessings. I feel very fortunate that we've not had any major impacts health-wise, and sort of work-wise. I've been very fortunate to be one of those people whose jobs and industry has not been too affected by the pandemic. So I think, I'm a more content person than I was before the pandemic started, if I'm being honest with you, because I kind of, appreciate a lot more in life, some of the simple things.
Great. I'm sure we'll sort of come back to the pandemic as well. So whilst we'll talk a bit about your full history and employment history and where things all started for you, I think it's important to mention about what you're currently doing now. Obviously working for Bechtel, it's a relatively recent role in the last sort of 6 to 9 months, I believe. But if you just tell us a bit more about what Bechtel do, certainly internationally, but obviously with their UK presence, your role at Bechtel, and a bit about how that's been, especially in a very challenging last sort of landscape of the last year or so.
Yeah, as you say, it is relatively recent. Joined in September last year, which is really different, joining a company in the sort of current situation. So Bechtel's an international company. It's family owned. It's an engineering and construction company. I think it's quite unique in the fact that it's family owned. So we're on our 5th generation of family leadership at this point in time. So there's sort of no public ownership, if you would, not traded on the stock market. So creates a very different type of culture, really. So big organization delivering significant projects all over the world. So dating right back to the days when Bechtel built the Hoover Dam, up until more modern times when it led the delivery of the Channel Tunnel, delivery on Sizewell B nuclear power station in the UK, helped set up the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority early in the 2000s, and also been working at Sellafield since 2011 with Cavendish as our partner on a very successful project called the Power Fuel Cladding Silo, where very much built on collaborative relationships between Sellafield, Bechtel, Cavendish, way under budget, way ahead of schedule, which is not something that we hear as often as we should in the nuclear sector. So yeah, it's an organisation that's got an incredible pedigree. And when they first sort of reached out to me about this potential opportunity, on the one hand, it was quite nerve-wracking given the fact that we were in a pandemic. Yet at the same time, it just felt really compelling. and so far so good. I'm learning a lot, which, you know, I'm 43 now, and big believer in everything that you do. If you feel like you're coasting, then, you know, then for someone like me anyway, I need to be somewhere where I always feel slightly outside of my comfort zone, somewhere where I feel like I'm learning a lot. I think, as someone who's been involved in the nuclear industry now for a little while, I've always been really interested in, you know, what it takes to deliver a major project, you know, nuclear or major projects. And Bechtel's, I think, built over 45 nuclear power stations around the world. It's played a leading role on about 80 others. So, you know, it's got a real pedigree there, and that sort of opportunity to work for a company that know how that's done in an environment where you're looking forward in the UK. When you think of net zero, there's going to be some significant projects, clean energy projects, including nuclear, moving forward. It felt like a real place for me to understand, you know, understand how that's done, whilst at the same time not just thinking about the front end in nuclear power, but also in nuclear cleanup as well. How do we, you know, work better to deliver nuclear cleanup projects? Things like the geological disposal facility, potential innovations that might be brought forward to deliver that project. Yeah, probably rabbited on a bit there, but it's an exciting place to be with a lot of opportunities.
How would you say that COVID's affected the way of working then for you? I mean, or if COVID wasn't around, or after COVID, will you be based locally? Is it a London-based role, or how will that all affect your role?
Yeah, so just on the personal bit, first of all, in terms of how it will affect my role, prior to lockdown, when I was still at the National Nuclear Laboratory, I think I'd got into a bad habit of needing to be in every room for every meeting, no matter where that was at any time, which, you know, takes its toll physically. You probably don't appreciate it at the time, and it certainly can have an impact if you have a family. I've got 3 young kids, and you know, it was a real wake-up call in many respects, because you can achieve so much being sat at one desk using the technologies that are available to us now. Obviously, you and I are conducting this interview, you know, over Zoom. So there's a lot that can be done, and I've learned a lot from that. And I think my family life has improved a great deal from it. So moving forward, definitely look to do more of that to stay closer to the family. In terms of, is it a London-based role? No is the answer. It's where our main HQ is. So for Bechtel, the infrastructure business of Bechtel is based here in the UK. So, you know, we're delivering projects all over the world from the UK, but moving forward, the intention is that we'll have operations closer to home for me.
Brilliant. So your sort of takeaway from the sort of like COVID, I mean, people have called it a catalyst for change, haven't they? Would you agree with that? And I mean, you've sort of already mentioned this, but about that sort of, what is the biggest takeaway for you afterwards? Is it what you've said about that you don't have to be in every room for every meeting, and you can do so much from your home desk? Is that your overall takeaway?
Yeah, I would say that, and also, you know, being appreciative, you know, counting your blessings. If you think of the businesses that the day before lockdown were secure businesses, you know, shops, tourism, hotels, all of these industries that you know would have had, you know, good businesses with good business people doing all of the right things, and then overnight they had everything taken away from them, and it had nothing to do with how good a business person they were or anything like that. It was to do with, you know, the different policies that the government needed to adopt to keep us all safe. So I was sat there feeling, crikey, I've been one lucky guy that the industry that I'm in, largely speaking, has been, you know, uninhibited. Operations have continued. You know, it's a very safe industry anyway in terms of how it operates. So yeah, it was a big wake-up call to say, crikey, you're a really lucky bloke, you've got a good job, you're in a good industry, You live in Cumbria, which is in many respects a great place to be when you're in a lockdown type of environment, because of the open spaces that we have. Don't feel hemmed in a way that many other people might feel in sort of bigger built up environments. So yeah, biggest takeaway is just thinking, how lucky I've been, and then makes you think more about what more can you do to help people that haven't been as lucky as you've been.
Brilliant. Well, we'll certainly come back to the whole COVID recovery later from a sort of business lister point of view. I think that's really important to come back to towards the end of this. But just while we're sort of still on you then, it'd be great to hear a bit about your background then. So sort of before everyone that knows the Ivan Baldwin of today, what were you doing beforehand? So, I mean, there's no better place to start from right back at the start. Sort of where were you kind of brought up as well, Ivan?
Yeah, so I was brought up largely in Preston, in Lancashire. My parents separated when I was quite young. I think I was 5 years old. So, and I went to live with my father, and he ended up moving to a smallish village near Chorley. So that was a fair distance away from my mum and my two sisters. And so I went to school in this small village called Brinskull. Had to make a new set of friends and sort of deal with, the things that you get when you're sort of the new in town. It used to be quite funny because they used to call me Townie, like it was a bit of a thing for them that they had someone that came from a big town in their village. I think they thought I was a bad influence on people, and perhaps they were right. And I was about 8 at that time. Then went to high school in Chorley, brought up a Roman Catholic Catholic high school. And then there was a custody battle. It wasn't particularly nice between my parents. And then I ended up going back to live with my mum when I think I was 12. And then so back to Preston, to another Catholic school, Christ the King School. At the time, quite a challenging environment, quite a tough environment. Maybe not the best place to get a fantastic education.
How were you as a student then, would you say? What sort of role did you put in the classroom? Were you the confident speaker at the front? Were you in the background? Were you the joker? Were you what role did you play in the classroom, would you say?
Yeah, it's fun. Joker, I would say. It'd be interesting to talk to my teachers, and I think I was quite disruptive. But you kind of look back and you wonder why, some of the things, and I think in part it was just to try to fit in. Given it was a pretty tough school, then you have to find a way of being popular, or something that sort of keeps you in with the right people. So I wasn't particularly tough, so I wasn't going to do it with in that way. But I guess I had a bit of the gift of the gab, and in the classroom, was sometimes disruptive, sometimes a bit cheeky, and so on. But I always wanted to do well. I'm fairly competitive, so whilst doing all those things, I was still doing my best to keep up with my studies, and I'd always had an ambition after watching Top Gun to go into the RAF. So that sort of kept me focused on how many GCSEs I thought that I needed to get, and I managed to come out of school doing reasonably well. I didn't do terribly well, but I did reasonably well. I got sort of 8 GCSEs above C grade at the time, so that was enough for me for what I needed to achieve.
Good. And what was the next step then after that? You've left with your GCSEs. What did you next do? Because obviously at that point you've got sort of further education, you've got university, I guess apprenticeships were an option. What was the sort of career path you went down?
Yeah, so at that time, nobody in our family had actually been to university. My eldest sister actually was just in a transition where she was looking to go into nursing, and she would then end up going on to do a master's degree. But at the time, nobody had done it, and I always looked at uni as this almost like mythical thing. Like if you went there, you must be dead clever. Like anyone who went to university must be, way leagues above me. So I never even thought of it. It never even seemed to be something that was on my path. So I actually went out and did an apprenticeship. I joined a printing company, commercial printing company, did a 3-year apprenticeship with that company. And I also did an English A-level at night school as well, because I'd always wanted to be a journalist. I had all these things, journalist, fighter pilot, you know, all these kind of like glamorous looking things that I wanted to do. Got through my time as a printer, got my city in guilds. And in part, the reason that I chose printing was because I wanted to travel the world. And that had been a bit influenced by my dad, who'd been in the Merchant Navy. Told me these stories about how he joined the Navy at 17 and ended up traveling the world. I'd been to Buenos Aires and Cape Town and Australia, and it just sounded really, really adventurous and exciting. So the company that I worked for went into liquidation. So I came out of my time as a printer. The company went into liquidation, and I found myself with, you know, a tiny bit of money in my back pocket. You know, literally was, but enough to buy a plane fare over to Australia. So I got my visa sorted, and from that point I went over to Australia for a couple of years.
Excellent. And what were you doing over there then? Was it still printing, or what was the main sort of thing you filled your time with over there?
Yeah, so you could, I'm not sure if it's the same now, but at the time you could do a 12-month working visa. You couldn't stay with one employer for more than 3 months. So when I got there, rocked up in Sydney, I was on my own. I was 20 years old, felt really out of my depth. Actually felt quite scared, I think, for the first time in my life. And then realised there was this whole, you know, traveller movement over there. Lots of Brits and Europeans all going over, picking fruit and doing all these different sort of jobs around the place. And I was in a youth hostel, staying with them all, hearing the stories, and I thought, right, okay, well, I'll try and get some casual work. So I ended up working on a building site first in Sydney. So I was in Sydney working there on a building site. But I sort of got to the point where I thought, I'm not really sure this crowd's for me. They were all there sort of like hippies and one thing and another, and they seemed to like go around in these traveller packs all around the country doing the traveller thing. And I thought, well, I've kind of come to experience the Australian life. So anyway, that's when I picked up on an opportunity to become a printer over there. Found a company in the middle of nowhere, it turned out, a place called Moree, that were on the lookout for a qualified printer. I found an advertisement for them in a newspaper, the Sydney Morning Herald. Called them up from a payphone. I'll never forget the day that I rang them, and they were dead keen for me to come. And I couldn't really quite understand why they would be so keen. But they said, yeah, we'll pay for your rail fare, we'll put you up in a hotel for a few days, come and see us, and, you know, kind of hopefully we'll be a good fit. Now, for someone that had been living in a youth hostel at that point, I think for 4 weeks, sharing a room with 6 other strangers in a bunk bed, I kind of thought the idea of having my own hotel room for a few days sounded really appealing. So I booked a train ticket to this place called Moree that I'd never heard of. Jumped on the train a couple of days later and couldn't believe it. It took like 12 hours to get there, which gives you some idea of the scale of Australia, because I was still in the same state. I hadn't left the state after a 12-hour train journey, and rocked up at this place, and it was very rural. I was the only Brit. It was a very Australian country lifestyle. They seemed to really take to me. Took me on at this company called the Moree Champion newspaper, and they offered me a bonus to stay for 2 years, which would have seen their youngest printer through his apprenticeship. So it was sort of helping them, you know, get people trained up. And I had a fabulous time, and by them offering me that 2-year contract meant that I could get sponsored to stay, so I could stay longer than the 12 months. Got to stay for 2 years, got to live a real rural Australian life. I did a bit of traveling whilst I was there as well, to the different places, saw most of Australia while I was there. And yeah, again, I was very, very lucky to have that experience.
Brilliant. Well, we'll certainly move on now from Australia, but last thing is, what was your best experience or best sort of takeaway moment from Australia for those few years you were there? That you can share with us, of course.
I was going I was young. I would say, and this might sound really corny, was the people that I met. So it's kind of like lifelong friends now. So Australian folks that lived there and were Australian guys who are now like kind of lifelong friends that have been over to the UK a few times. I've been over there. The nephew of a really good friend of mine is now a school teacher, and he's looking to come over to the UK, and I've been sort of helping him potentially make that bridge to come over here. So that sort of lifelong connection. And then I did a 4-week tour while I was there around the country, and that was with people from all over the world. So I met a girlfriend there from Texas, a guy who became a good friend from Holland, a girl who became a good mate from Israel. So there's, just those exposure to different people, different cultures, different ideas, and those lifelong friendships.
Excellent. Now that's really good to hear. So after all that, then, after all the excitement of that, what was it that brought you back to Cumbria, and I suppose ultimately brought you back to the UK and back to Cumbria eventually?
Yeah. So I won't bore people with details. I mean, I have a complicated relationship with my dad, but at that point in time, he had a small building company. And I came back and sort of helped work at the company, starting from the bottom up. So, they had small projects with the likes of United Utilities and the prison service, insurance companies, things like that. So I ended up going to university at night school, doing a HNC in building studies, and gradually worked my way up to being, like a general manager type position, but in a company that was about $1 million turnover. So it wasn't a huge company. I then went to BAE Systems, joined a project management intake, and it was BAE's aerospace business. And I was in a project manager role for about 3 years, and ended up then moving into a business development role, because essentially somebody said, "You've got the gift of the gab," sort of thing. So my school days coming back to haunt me. You'd probably enjoy BD, and I think we'd like to have you. So I did business development roles. I worked at a head office in London on an ethics program with PwC. Anyway, great career. Did about 8 years there.
And that was obviously your nearest to being in Top Gun. Not quite the same, but the nearest you were probably going to get to being in Top Gun was being in the aerospace division. And then obviously after that, you've done, as I mentioned at the start, numerous different roles. And there's probably not time to go into every single one on this podcast. But do you want to just mention a few kind of key experiences from a variety of those roles that you had, or perhaps some key learning from those different positions that you've done?
Yeah, the one thing in the BAE Systems side that I'd say really was great for me. So I mentioned I worked on a special project in head office. So it was an ethics project, and I was brought in to work with PwC as like a deployment manager. And the key takeaway was I was working with, so maybe late 20s, working with the exec of BAE Systems, so the people right at the top of the business. And I was so nervous about meeting them for the first time. I just thought, this is like, God territory, these people. You never got anywhere near them in a company of 110,000 people. And they were just normal. Like, they were more normal than the middle management. They were really down to earth, had time for me. And it did so much for my self-confidence. So I think the key takeaway and key learning is, well, for me, was try to sort of put yourself in environments where, you're out of your comfort zone, with different people learning different things, and it does wonders for your self-confidence. It certainly did for me. I kind of felt after that experience, you could put me in front of anybody in any situation, and I would feel like I could hold my own at the very least, and sort of be confident in that situation.
Excellent. And then I suppose from that, then you sort of left the aerospace side of things, but staying in a BD type role, but moving more towards nuclear through Nuvia, Bendels, and obviously culminating at NNL being obviously very nuclear. But obviously there's 3 different companies there, all doing 3 very different things. But would you care to share a few experiences from those as well, about or I suppose that the key thing is key lessons from your time there, I think?
Yeah, so they were all largely business development roles, but they all had different aspects of it. So some, take Bendels for example. was very much about the here and now, winning work. There was a part of the role that was working with other parts of the engineering group because they're owned by Cars Group. So there was some strategy stuff, but it was very much focused on the here and now. So how do you feed a business with sales? So that was a real learning curve about dealing with, I mean, you'll know this as I'm running a small business, kind of being laser focused on the sales funnel, what's coming next, how are you preparing for it, etc. So that was good. Having worked in a big business like BAE Systems, to go to that sort of more hungry environment, that was a real learning curve. NNL, fascinating organization with some really good people, like really, really smart, passionate people that are really, really want nuclear to succeed. So I think there I learned a lot about the industry, the full fuel cycle, the relationship the industry has with government. That was a real learning curve, and for the first time, I think, at a meaningful size, I had my own profit and loss. So at the end, it was about 40 million, which was roughly a third of the organisation. So I had to sort of get far more into the detail on the numbers, where we're making money, where we weren't making money, how you focus attention on that, etc. So that was a great learning curve as well. So yeah, different types of experiences.
Definitely. I mean, you mentioned when you were 20 being in Australia. I mean, I guess what you must have been about sort of 39 or 40 when you joined NNL. But then, did you see yourself in that 20-year period getting to the status of a VP role? Being a vice president role. Did you imagine 20 years later that's what you'd be doing, or was that sort of quite an organic thing that happened?
It was very organic. I always remember having a personal development review with a guy at BAE, and he said to me, in 10 years' time, what do you want to be? And I remember saying to him, like, how would you even know? Will I, a bit flippant, but will I even be alive in 10 years? And I said, will the jobs of today still exist in 10 years? And I genuinely didn't know. So I've been very organic. I've been very lucky. Opportunities tend to have sort of come my way, but I've grabbed them with both hands, when they've come my way. And one thing I have learned is you're never ready. You're never totally ready for any particular thing that comes your way. And I think that, I do hear some people, I do some mentoring for early careers people, and, sort of like talking to friends, etc. And I hear them say, I want to go for that job, but I've only got 80% of the things that they're looking for. And my experience has always been that, don't be arrogant, but be confident and put yourself forward and be honest. Say, I can do 80% of this. The other 20% I'll learn when I'm on the job. So that's how things have always happened. And the NNL one was funny because I found vice president a very, I didn't like using the title, if I'm being honest with you. It's not very British, is it?
It's not, is it? It's not.
And Bechtel's the opposite way around. Like, the title manager in Bechtel means a lot. Like if you're a manager in Bechtel, you're a very senior person. I tend to find in other parts of the nuclear industry, a manager's not considered, kind of not considered as senior. So it's weird, isn't it? The value that we attach to
titles and things, yeah.
Different titles, yeah.
Absolutely. So sort of like throughout that last sort of 5-10 years or so with those different careers, what part did the business cluster play in that? Because I mentioned at the start that you've been chair for a number of years now, and obviously you were a board member prior to that as well. But how did you first get involved with the cluster? Why did you get involved? And sort of how has that journey segued with your career as well?
Yeah, the business. I hope this doesn't sound corny, but the business cluster is something that I'm just so incredibly passionate about, and it's hard to explain, fully why that is. Sometimes some things just don't feel right. So I was introduced to it actually by Liz Bow, who I think a lot of people will know. She was on the management team, I think, at the time, and she's just the most, kind of giving and reaching of individuals, who's always looking to help people and get people involved. So when I joined Nuvia, Liz was one of the first people to contact me and said, we have this entity called Britain's Energy Goes Business Cluster. Nuvia is a part of it. Would you like to come to a meeting? And because I was so new and everything was, so sort of like daunting, the sector, Cumbria, didn't know anybody, I sort of, leapt at it and took it with both hands. And I'll always be incredibly grateful for that, because it was a soft landing. Rather than going away and reading a million books and a million, internet websites and trawling down prospect lists and all these different things that you do as a BD person. In my experience, one of the best things to do for BD person is to build relationships. So, and then organically you're learning, you're finding things out, you're learning where the bear traps are, you're learning where the opportunities are. People start reaching out for you to be part of their teams for bids, and so on and so forth. So the cluster gave me a heck of a lot. And yeah, over time, it's been one of those sort of outlets, really, that, in your day job, more often than not, it's really, tough. You've got some hard targets. You've got financial things you're trying to achieve, or a lot of pressure. The thing about the cluster is that you've got some of those things, but it's more about, you and a group of other people. And when you take the wider cluster members, a massive group of people, you're all trying to help make a good thing happen. And sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. You never get anything right. But it's a great feeling to be trying to make things happen that are going to have a positive effect. So it's been great from that perspective. It's helped me build relationships both in the nuclear sector and outside. So you then start to learn things about local government, national government, about different policy issues, parliamentarians, things about party politics. There's a whole variety of things that the cluster touches. And if you're interested in, learning about things and so on, then it's a great place to be for that.
Certainly. While we're on the cluster then, Ivan, what would you say is the biggest sort of challenge and also opportunity facing the cluster? And I suppose that's meaning sort of the kind of business community of Cumbria and broader. What would you say that is, especially obviously just given that we're kind of slowly coming out of the pandemic now?
Yeah, crikey, good questions there, Adam. I don't know where I'd start with that. I think for the actual cluster entity, so the team, John and Hazel and the like, the biggest challenge is being relevant. In my experience, sometimes there are organisations that are out there that become a bit self-fulfilling. And for an organisation like the cluster that isn't there to make a profit, things that are very, very tangible, like in that way, has to be always mindful of actually being relevant, that it's actually doing what it's supposed to be doing and delivering for its members and its stakeholders and so on. So that'll always be key. And as the environment changes, and of course, we've just seen that within the pandemic, then the cluster has to change. And you saw that last year where we flipped everything from in person, and the cluster was all about being there in person, right? It was about the big room, the auditorium, Energis, all of those different things. And it had to flip all digital overnight. And credit to the team, did an absolutely amazing job in making that happen, but it almost had to have a new identity. So what was it going to be within all of that? So that's the cluster. So, day-to-day challenge. But I think for sort of businesses and the members here, and maybe looking at an opportunity for a second, I think that there's an opportunity now to really, really deliver on the things that actually matter to us. So I think it felt to me at one time that we wanted to secure more opportunities for the local area. We wanted businesses to trade more in the local area. We wanted people to come and locate here in the local area and, do their business from here. And, we wanted to slow the decline of young people and bring, sort of grow the skills base for young people, etc. And that all felt hard, and it still is. But I think that one of the spin-offs of the pandemic is how it's placed a different emphasis on a lot of that. So the government and its Build Back Better as a result of the pandemic and levelling up, I think is a real opportunity for us to seize net zero. Getting the UK to net zero by 2050 is massive, and Cumbria could play a huge role in that. And then I think, have people started thinking differently about where they want to live? So does Cumbria start to become more attractive to talent and, people that are already here and might otherwise sort of leave and then never come back? Does Cumbria become a more of an attractive place because of what we've experienced during the COVID pandemic? And it certainly has for me. My wife's from London, well, she's from Cyprus originally, but spent a lot of the time living in London. And she would never have left London unless, it wasn't for me and us having a baby together. But now she'd never go back because she's seen the quality of life that we can have here. So I think there's lots of opportunity in that. But again, to throw another cliche out there, it's up to us to sort of seize that opportunity and actually make it into something that we need it to be.
Definitely. You've actually segued very, very nicely into the next question, which was going to be that sort of after, the busy day's work, among the many roles that you have, how do you like to sort of escape from things a little bit, relax? I mean, obviously one of the hats you wear, of course, as you mentioned, is father to 3. That's, of course, a role to come home to. But sort of, what sort of things do you do to relax and unwind?
I would love to be able to say, Adam, I paint, I write books, or I had all this time to do these things, but there'll be, if there are any people that watch this, if there are, then those that have kids or have kids in the family will appreciate that it's really hard to have that your own time. So largely speaking, these days it's the simple stuff. We play at home together, watch a film. My eldest son is massively into Nintendo, so we like playing Mario Kart together, which is actually quite nice because during the pandemic, so that my eldest 2 children are from a previous marriage, and they were being homeschooled early part of this year because the schools were closed by the grandparents, and the grandparents were self-isolating. So that meant that I couldn't see them for 2 months. They couldn't come and stay with us. So what we did was we did video calls where we played Nintendo together online. So we were having, Mario Kart races online together and stuff like that. So that was a godsend and was absolutely brilliant. We've just got a puppy though. So even though we have this life where we, moan a lot that we don't have a lot of time for ourselves, we decided to get a very energetic little puppy, a beagle called Binsey. So so that's pretty much how our life's taken up.
Excellent. Well, you're certainly piling on more and more sort of things to do there. You're always filling your time very well, I think. I suppose one question that sort of leads off from that then, I find it interesting to ask people is kind of, do you have any sort of inspirational kind of figures in your life or sort of like MOs that you live by, or sort of key sort of, sort of key beliefs that you try and operate on? That's quite an interesting question to ask people. It can be from the most sort of thought-provoking to the most simple answer, really. But beliefs, your sort of MO that you live by, and inspirational figures or people that you're around. I do admit I'm possibly putting you on the spot here because this is not a pre-planned question. I find out an interesting openness about people.
So growing up, I was a massive fan of Muhammad Ali. I really got into his story, funny enough, when I was in Australia and I had a lot of time on my hands. And I found it remarkable that someone of his age, at a time, the time that he lived in as a black man in the US, had the courage, craziness, whatever you want to call it, to take on the establishment in the way that he did, courage of convictions and all of that, alongside being an absolute legend in the boxing ring. I was just absolutely compelled by his story. So I read pretty much every piece of literature I could get my hands on about the guy, good and bad, because he was, like all of us, a flawed character as well. So I guess in a way there's a bit of that comes out in terms of when times get tough and you think, should I do something? And then you're a bit scared about it. And then I think about, what he did. Refusing the draft for the Vietnam War in particular, at a time when similarly notable people like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, these guys were being killed. And he essentially made himself a target in the same way, in the way that he sort of created a position in the way that he did. So you think, wow. So sometimes, when you think, should I do this, should I do that, I'm a bit nervous about it. You reflect on people like that and other people in our day-to-day lives, and you think to yourself, well, if they can do something like that, then I'm sure this will be all right. The other one, I guess, is sort of closer to home, is I've got two sisters. And so I've always had strong female role models in my life. My eldest sister, mentioned before, got a master's degree, became a nurse. She's a specialist in breast cancer. Has done so much that's improved the lives of individuals and people, and that just absolutely blows me away. And my other sister Lisa, so they're both older than me, has always been there for me in the most difficult of times, the most dark of times, when you're at your absolute lowest. And she always seems to be very level-headed, very straight, always has some like little pearls of wisdom. So again, I look at my sisters and big inspirations on me in my life.
Excellent. There's a nice sort of mental image there of before you're going on stage at one of your overseas talks, the likes of Korea or Japan, with you thinking of Muhammad Ali as your sort of motivation of going forward and be strong. I like that mental picture. So that's actually, again, just leading on to the kind of the final question that we like to ask people. It's quite similar really, but it's that whole, what's the one piece of advice you would like to pass on to your younger self if you could go back to, say, being in your late teens or something? Now you're 43. Rewind sort of 25 years or so, what would you like to pass on to yourself? That obviously, the hope is that we can pass this on to some of the next generation today.
Yeah. This is an easy one because it's a bit of a defining moment, and the individual, I'll spare her blushes, but I did a Centre for Leadership Performance Leader to Leader program, early doors, and I remember speaking to somebody after. And I said, right, I've learned all these things about myself. I've learned about all my gaps. I'm not good at this. I'm not good at that. I'm not good at the other. So I'm going to focus on those gaps and improve. And she turned around to me and she said, have you not thought about just thinking about all your strengths and just being the best version of the things that make you strong? And I was like, okay, interesting way of looking at it. And that just changed my whole philosophy and my whole outlook. So that if I'd known that or thought that way at a far younger age, then I think that I would have had a bit of an easier journey through my career and through my life, because I spent a lot of time feeling inadequate, insecure, still do now. I often go into rooms and people call it what do they call it when you don't feel good enough and you walk into an environment? Imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
I get those moments when I feel that way and I'm like, oh crikey. But far less, I'll now when I'll present on something, I'll share a report with a stakeholder or a boss or whoever it might be, and I just feel a bit more confident about who I am, because I think that actually what I think matters and has some value to it, as opposed to trying to, maybe tell them what I think they want to hear because I'm trying to make up for my flaws and that. So I'd say to anybody really, really focus on what you're good at. There is no one better in the world at being you. It's the one, it's the thing that makes you unique. Nobody can take it away from you.
That's a great sort of takeaway, actually, Ivan. I think that's the first thing you mentioned there about the whole sort of play on your strengths and really utilize them, not focus on what you're not good at and the areas you fall down on. That's a massive takeaway, actually. So that's really great advice. So that sort of brings us to the end of the podcast. That's followed our usual sort of format of getting to know someone. I feel that people will have got to know you really well there. And I think the last thing just to say is obviously thanks for all that you do for the cluster, obviously as a shadow board member and a member of the cluster in my own right as a business. We're always very grateful for the time that you give to that. And as you mentioned throughout this podcast as well, you've always been very open with your time and like to support people through mentorship or through various charity roles that you do as well. So obviously we're all very, very much appreciative of that. And yeah, just thank you for sharing everything today.
No, thanks, Adam. And it goes both ways. I mean, what you guys from the shadow board put in, you've made a huge difference. And actually, I get a lot out of that personally, because you've actually made life a lot more interesting for the cluster. It's achieved a lot more since you guys have been involved. So a big thank you back at you. And I want to say one thing. I've been sat here through this thing, and I've got these painted nails, and I didn't know if I'd been putting my hand up at any point in time. And not that you should feel you need to explain yourself, but that was my daughter yesterday painting my fingernails. So just in case people have been looking at it thinking I'm branching out into a new thing.
I must say, I did notice that on your photo yesterday. I think you had a little sort of addition on the head as well, but thankfully that one's gone. Anyway, great, Ivan. Good to see you today, and obviously thanks for sharing the story. And look forward to seeing you again in person soon.
Yeah, you too. Cheers, Adam. Thank you.